Here to talk about the next installment of the RPG course. So the third installment. This is the Epic Saga. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of what this course is about and what's happening. At least it can help me with some of the details, because I'm always fuzzy on some of the details in terms of when we're launching and so on and so forth. But basically, so this is the third course in our series on the RPG. And the first course was the core combat course, where we taught basically, all the movement and combat and the kind of really core mechanics of an RPG, click to move, all that sort of stuff. Second one was the inventory course, where we took a look at creating an inventory asset that is essentially independent of RPGs. You don't have to do it in an RPG, and we show you how to implement it in our particular RPG project. So that's inventories, pickups, dropping things, all of this integrated with a saving system. And our third installment is dialogue and quests. So as it would suggest, as the name would suggest, we're building, first of all, a dialogue system. So usual kind of thing, walk up to an AI, click to chat, go through a dialogue tree with them with multiple options, and have your dialogue have effects in the world. So you might take on a quest, you might anger the guard and he attacks you, you might just have a funny little conversation with an AI and learn more about the world. And on top of this, the dialogue system is then going to be integrated with our questing system, which we're also building as part of this course, where you're going to be able to have a quest list with multiple objectives per quest, track your progress through the objectives, knowing where you need to go at any particular point, and then getting rewards for completion of quests. So that's then going to integrate back with our part 2 inventory system and be able to award items for the completion of a quest. So those two are they work well together. Quests and dialogue work very well together, which is why we're putting them together in a course. However, they don't have to be you don't have to implement them into an RPG. It's not RPG specific. We're just using the RPG as a project to show you how you can integrate it into your... And you could take either of the two systems into a game. You don't have to have the dialogue with the quests. You could just have a questing system in your game. If, for example, you're implementing a first-person shooter, it's more shoot, no talk. And if you're just doing a dialogue system where you just want to be able to talk to people around the world without having quests and so on, you can have that too. They're quite loosely coupled systems that we can integrate together quite easily, and they work well together, but they are not actually completely inseparable, if that makes sense. So that's the aim with this course, and through the process we're going to be touching on some very interesting things. One of the main things that we're going to, really meaty things we're going to be tackling and doing in this course is teaching how to do editor-based stuff. So we're going to be creating the whole dialogue editor from scratch. I did debate whether we should, take some off-the-shelf components, try and make a very simple dialogue system where we don't need an editor. But I really thought there's not much out there that teaches you how to make dialogue editors or any kind of advanced editors in Unity. So, and the API there is really poorly documented. So that's what I decided to take on. And the first section, we dive basically right in and teach you how to make your own custom editors based on custom scriptable objects in Unity, which will allow you to make a dialogue editor, obviously. But beyond that, the aim is to really teach you how to make the, as one of our reviewers put it, very, very beautifully, I thought, it's a great example of making the editor work for you and not working around the editor. So we don't have to be in the position where we're saying, okay, well, Unity sets up our scriptable objects like this, so I guess I have to, tinker around and waste lots of time. No, you can create... This is the great thing about editors, is they're entirely about making life easier for you as a game designer to smash out your game, because really all the hard work of making a game happens in game design. It happens in making that game from just a a set of, a load of code and a load of functionality into something that's actually fun to play. So that's why we've put so much focus into the editor section. So that's the one that's currently finished and out there with the review group. And the other stuff that we're going to be covering is going to include making the in-game UI to display the dialogue and run through the dialogue, as well as all the triggering and conditional components that hang off the dialogue so that you can integrate it with any of your gameplay. You can trigger events, you can make it conditional upon what hat the player is wearing. Particularly fancy hat, you might want to trigger a piece of comic dialogue off the back of that. All those kinds of things you're going to be able to do with this system. It's very flexible. And then we're going to implement the quests as the last step to, again, doing a quest list UI and then having all the quest components in the background that allow you to trigger quests, to complete quests, and to integrate both the dialogue system in-game and the quest system in-game with our own save system asset, which if you've taken any of the RPG courses, you will be familiar with. We touch upon it a lot. It's very core to that game and to any game that you're going to use, really. So we've had a few questions coming in. So I'm going to turn to the AMA live channel, answer a question from there. And then I'll ask a question or see if anybody has any questions they want to ask in the voice lounge as well. So Marcus, first of all, thank you for speaking up in the voice lounge a little bit earlier. So apart from the already mentioned editor API, do you introduce any other intermediate concepts in this course, interfaces, delegates, etc.? Yes, we do. So and the idea here is that though it is the third part in our RPG series, you do not have to have done any of the RPG series in order to take this course. We will give you the RPG series project as it stands so far. As a starting point, we will cover anything that we touch. We will tell you why it's there and how to edit it, how to change it. But a lot of the stuff that we're going to be developing is going to be from scratch, new scripts, new code. So we won't be touching a lot of the old stuff. And as such, it's just going to be an example of how you can integrate into an existing project. But the question, back to the question, any other intermediate concepts here? So we've got so interfaces and delegates. Yeah, we're going to be doing delegates and events. We're not going to be covering them in too much detail. Other courses have done that already. So we're going to be covering them in enough detail to use them, but not going into too much detail. We're going to cover things like the enumerator and yield return functions, so functions that contain yield returns. So yeah, and we're going to, another advanced topic that we're going to be covering is building Unity UI using the auto layout system. So you may, if you've used any of the Unity UI stuff in the past, you may be familiar with the concept of the rect transform and how the rect transform has these things called anchors, and you can set up stuff like that. However, there's this kind of alternate layout system called the auto layout system in Unity UI, which allows you to take cues from the content you're laying out. So if, for example, you've got an image, it'll have a preferred size, and you can use that preferred size to automatically rescale the rest of your UI around that image. Same thing goes for text. So this is going to be heavily used in both our dialogue system and our quest list system to show to rescale the UI and make it appropriately sized for the different sized dialogue. So you might have a large chunk of dialogue or a very small chunk of dialogue. You want the dialogue window to rescale around that. So I hope that answered your question, Marcus. We've had a lot of feedback along those lines, so we're going to be doing it more like Core Combat. It's going to be a write all the code together kind of approach rather than showing the code. The only examples where we will be showing the code is where it's already been covered in a previous course. So if we're integrating with a system that's already been built, we'll be running through the code and saying, you know, this is how it works, this is how we're going to integrate with it, this is how we're going to edit it, and we'll show you all the edits there, but we're not going to rebuild any of that. For obvious reasons, we can't rebuild the whole course. So yeah, so hopefully that's going to be a more popular option. I know that the way we did the inventory course was less popular, which is why we've decided to go this way. Hopefully, some people still really like that approach, and so it's going to upset those those folks. We can't get everyone happy, so yeah. So, but I also thought it's more appropriate in this course anyway. Especially because we're doing this very new concept of the dialogue editor. So taking it really slow makes a lot of sense there. Probably it's not. I'll never say never, right? But it's not on the cards right now. Hey guys, we're only just getting to the end of this series in Unity after God knows how many years. We might need a little bit of a breather before we undertake it in Unreal, because while Unreal is amazing and has a lot of features that might speed some things along, I think it's still going to take a long time to to make this whole thing in Unreal. So I'm afraid, guys, it's not on the horizon for Unreal just yet. Yeah, it slightly makes me queasy at the thought of embarking upon that epic journey. No pun intended. I think Luca was also asking about if you buy it on our course, will it be transferred to Udemy? We would love to be able to do that. We can't, sadly. So if you buy it on our course, it's just going to stay. It's just going to stay on our site. Udemy no longer allow us to produce as many free coupons as we like, so we cannot give you courses for free on Udemy, unfortunately. So yeah, if you do want to have it on Udemy, you're gonna have to wait until we release it on Udemy and buy it then, or buy it twice. We're very happy. Or it almost. So no, it's not. It's not the final. We won't be done at the end of this course. We are planning one more course. However, the final course, and I think I'm all right to say this, may be a free course. Because what we're going to be doing in that final course is really the wrap up. It's going to be and everything else. So that's very likely to be a free course. I'm not sure yet. We're not 100% sure, because it's going to cover a couple of little odds and ends that haven't yet been covered, including a bit of designing the game and getting to that final, like, here's a moment that uses all of the features we just built. So it's going to use inventory, it's going to use dialogue, it's going to use quest, it's going to use the combat, it's going to use all of that. We'll just create a small, short, probably 5-minute to play moment, and that will be the final endpoint of the RPG series. So having included all of that, and there are a couple of things still missing there. So we need to include special abilities. I know that's on the roadmap still. It was included in the first iteration of Core Combat, but then we left it out of the second iteration of Core Combat. So that is going to come back in. We already have the action bar ready there. We built that in the inventory system, so you can drop special abilities in from your inventory into the action bar. We just don't currently have a way of actually actioning those those special abilities just yet. So yeah, there's more coming. There's more coming, but it's very close to wrapping up, and we're hoping to wrap it up by about Q1 to next year. So it's soon. No, we don't have anything on the cards yet for procedurally generating levels. I know ProcGen is one that folks want a lot of. So it's not yet. We'll be looking at things to do in the near future. And this may work its way into some other experiments that we're working on that are not necessarily courses. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, we're aware that this is a very sought after topic. It would be a lot of fun to do, so I'd love to do it, but again, not on the roadmap just yet. We covered some sort. I don't know what you mean by cutscenes, Luca. Here, maybe you can chime in on the voice lounge if you wanted to clarify your question. but we did some sort of fly-through cutscenes on the core combat course. So you would walk across a bridge, and then it would, fly through, showing you all the enemies and where your target destination is, that kind of thing, and then resume and give you control again. So does that cover your question? And then, Azrael Studios, you've asked a really interesting question, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that we will likely not be including. Saddens me to say, but it's really hard to. It's hard enough to make a game that includes all these features, let alone a whole series of courses. So, one thing that we dropped fairly early on was the concept of having an RPG that you could both use keyboard and mouse to control and a controller. So that kind of mixed interface we did away with. It would have made a lot of things much too complicated to teach, such as how do you do a nice UI that works for both controller and keyboard, or both controller and mouse rather. So because then you can't do things like dragging. So that's one thing we had to give up, unfortunately. What else? What are some of the other big ticket items that we're not going to include? So I'll start with some of the things that we are going to include that are still on the cards. That's going to be, we're going to have some concept of stores. So the idea of you walk up to a seller, see what his wares are. You have some amount of coin, currency, whatever, and you can buy and sell stuff from your inventory to his inventory and vice versa. We are going to have that probably in part 4. As I mentioned, special attacks, special abilities, healing, that sort of thing is going to come still in part 4. Also, giving different attribute points to your characters. So when you level up, giving perhaps more strength or stamina or dexterity to your character, and allowing those character attributes to influence the way you fight or the way you do business or whatever you want to do. So having those kind of character classes and distributing points between them, that's still all to come, hopefully, in part 4. So those are things we will be doing. There's a long laundry list of things that we probably won't be doing, such as achievements, opening and looting chests, although that's a pretty straightforward extension of the inventory system we've already got. A lot of these things we're not going to do them because, to some extent, it's a great challenge for you to go ahead and try and implement these things. So in some senses, it would be robbing you of the opportunity to go and implement this stuff. So opening and looting chests, a basic crafting system of combining elements together. I know for a fact that there's already a student who has built a basic crafting system. So do go and search the forum for that, because if you want to know how to do that, I'm sure they'd be happy to share their code. In fact, I think we've got a blog post on it. Is that right, Lucy? I think we do. We've got yes. Yeah, so we've already got a blog post on that, but that's not something we're going to cover in the course. So a lot of this stuff that we aren't covering in the core course, we hope to in some way cover either via blog posts or showcasing student work, or just challenging you to get these things to be done. So what other things have we got here? We aren't going to have a pause menu. We're going to have a menu, but it's not actually pausing the game. But again, that's something that you could extend to do. Volume controls, control mapping, all those kinds of game options and customization. We're not going to go into that. That's a bit too it's a bit too generic for an RPG game, to be fair. We're trying to cover in this RPG series topics that are crucial to an RPG. Dialogue, crucial to an RPG. Saving, obviously, we need to have saving, and there's quests, there's inventory, there's combat. Those things are really, really core to how an RPG operates. Whereas control mapping and that sort of stuff, that doesn't need to be in an RPG course. Fast travel between locations we're not going to do, but again, this is an extension that you might want to try for yourself, just because it's going to be laborious to put together. It's going to require us to make a lot of maps and UIs and stuff like that, but it's all skills that you will have from having completed the series, but it's something that would just be laborious to watch me do on screen. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to avoid. Doors and keys, no, we're not going to have that, but it's going to be fairly straightforward that you could have an item in your inventory and have a door that checks whether that item is there. Day-night cycles we're not going to do. Again, same kind of thing as the world map. It's something that's not really RPG specific. Easter eggs, updates, game updates and how to distribute them. I think we're not going as far as that. I think at this point it's not the right time. Yeah, so I think those are some of the RPG things that we're not including. Do ask if there was anything else. Oh, so someone has just asked multiplayer with the RPG. So that's also something we're not including. We're not going to be talking about how to make this particular game multiplayer. So if you do want to make the game multiplayer, good luck to you. It's going to be difficult for a start because we know that multiplayer RPGs, especially massively multiplayer ones, are a huge undertaking, one of the largest games that you could hope to achieve. So just consider your ability as an individual developer or a very small team, whether you'll be able to do this. You'll need to keep the scope really limited. You probably want to have much fewer features than even we've put in to our courses. Really keep it to a super minimal RPG. And then we do have the Unity multiplayer course. So combining the skills of those two, you should be able to go on and make a multiplayer RPG if you want to. But I will caution you that that's quite an ambitious undertaking. So that's also something that we're not going to be covering as part of the RPG course. Multiplayer is its own topic in its own right, and so it will be its own course as well. No, so we don't, but again, we covered a bit of the use of timeline in making our Cinemachine cameras move around, and you can use those concepts and that timeline to then trigger animations. So you can do the big cinematics where character A gets moved over here and he does a certain animation, you play some audio and then you move the camera over there. That kind of stuff you can do using the same tools that we used. If you want to do like the really big cinematic cutscenes, the kind of pre-rendered, basically they're just playing you an MP4. So there's really not very much to teach you there. I think you can quite easily find a blog post or a set of instructions that will tell you how to play an MP4 in the middle of your game. So then the question just becomes about how are you going to actually create that cinematic, which is more of a question for the Blender course than it is for the Unity course. Good question. I didn't include that one in the list. No, we're not planning to have a skill tree per se. So I assume by skill tree, yeah, we'd be putting kind of experience points into one direction or another. We're going more down the route of the attributes. So the dexterity and so on. So that would be the kind of thing we're trying to aim for. We may have in that process, we may have items or special abilities or swords that have requirements on them. So you may have a sword that you can only wield if you are strength 10, for example. So that's going to take us a little bit along the skill tree, in the skill tree direction, but it's not quite the same as a skill tree system. Although I'm fairly confident that if you have taken the whole series, you could invent or create your own skill tree system, especially with the knowledge of custom editors that you're going to have from the dialogue and quest system. You can easily have a tree editor, because a dialogue system is fundamentally a node editor where you have nodes and you have children of those nodes and so on. So that same kind of concept could be used to make a skill tree system, a skill tree editor rather. But you don't even need to go that complicated probably with a skill tree system. It is quite likely that you can express a skill tree simply in scriptable object terms. So I do encourage you to try it for yourself, really, but it is not something that we're going to cover explicitly now. That's quite difficult to do because the way it works with the Unity editor stuff and the Unity editor API is that it kind of relies upon the editor being present. When you make a build of a game, it actually excludes all of the editor APIs from it. So you would have to build an in-game system to be a dialogue editor, and that's just slightly harder because the editor UI has a lot of stuff built in, such as an undo system, and that really relies upon the editor. So the fact that you can say like, hey, I'm about to make a change to this object, record and undo, and then automatically, you're going to be able to hit Control Z and it'll go back to before you made that change. All that kind of stuff's going to be thrown away. So you'd be much better off getting them to be able to use Unity. Yeah, that's what I recommend. So there's two parts, two sets of data from that. So the first one's going to be your designer's data. So the designer and the script writer and the people who are creating the content for your game. So there's that data. The kind of editor time data before you launch the game, and then there's all the data about when the game's being played. And I assume you're asking about the former rather than the latter. So obviously, when you're playing the game and what's the state of the quests and that sort of stuff, that's going to be a question for putting in the save file of your game. So however you're doing that, if you're using our saving asset, then that's going to automatically put it into a binary file for you on the file system. If, however, we're talking about the data for the dialogues, etc., for me, the easiest thing always when using Unity is just to use its native data system, which is scriptable objects. So either scriptable objects or doing prefabs off of mono behaviors when that's appropriate, but prefabs off of mono behaviors really only make sense when you're then going to be spawning that thing into the world. So where we've got something that doesn't really have a physical representation, doesn't really need to have components and mono behaviors, etc., then we're going to be using scriptable objects. And scriptable objects give us all the flexibility we really need because they allow us to serialize down an object into essentially what is JSON. I think it's not quite JSON. I think if you open up a serialized scriptable object in a text editor, I think it's YAML, the serialization format used. But that's if you're interested in serialization formats. But yeah, basically it's going to take it down to a text file. Using a separate database is really, I think, unnecessary. And the reason is databases are great when you have very frequent access and when you have multi-user access. So where you would want to use a database in a game is for managing a multiplayer game where you need to get a user's login details or a user's details. So when you log into Fortnite, for example, they're checking your name and username against a database, checking that it's still up to date because you haven't changed it via the browser, for example. So that's where the multi-user element comes in, because their servers and their browser might have changed your password, and then the game needs to have the most up-to-date information when it goes to check. So that's why a database is useful. However, if we've just got data that we are shipping with the game and that Unity is basically just going to load into memory and reference that, then there's really no need for that to be in a database. The database isn't going to give you anything, it's just going to add weight. It is more linear in terms of the objectives displayed, but it's quite easy to do. There won't be any kind of native support for branching quests. So saying, if you do this, then trigger off this set of objectives. If you do that, trigger off a different set of objectives. Instead, what we're going to be doing is the way you could do it using this system, and you can extend it to the point, you can build on top of it to make branching quest lines. But the way we're going to allow you to do that essentially is you can have a trigger off the back of completing a quest, and that can trigger starting a new one. So if you've gone and completed an objective, it might go and complete the quest and then give you a new one. So that might be quest variant A, or if you'd completed a different objective, or if you'd done something differently, you might trigger off quest variant B. But for simplicity, we're keeping it down to just having linear quests at the moment. Yeah. A few gaps in my daily basis, that's for sure. But some days it's a load of videos being added, a good dozen or so, and then some days it's none. So there will be videos galore if you start now. There's already there's a lead up of about 5 hours of content in there. So if you dive in now, you probably will struggle to catch up with me. The gauntlet has been thrown. Yes. Not in this course. No, that's a bit of an R&D effort, to be honest. I think I'd be interested if you've got some examples of games that are actually doing this at the moment, because it's not something that I've heard of other than AI Dungeon, which it does basically entirely this. It does entirely text-based RPG, where the entire adventure is generated by AI. So you can literally, rather than selecting from a list of 4 options of what actions you're going to do in a particular scenario, you've got complete free-form decision. You can say, I'm going to jump on one leg and sing the national anthem, and then it's going to use the AI to try and figure out how it should continue the story off the back of your decision. So that I thought was pretty cool, but I don't know of many places, many things that are yet doing this kind of stuff. I'd love to do more AI content in general. So if that's stuff that you guys are interested in, AI, I should specify here, because AI in games is usually means something a lot more stupid than AI in research, because AI in research tends to mean trying to approach human intelligence, whereas in games it tends to be trying to fake human intelligence within the confines of this game. So it tends to be a lot, the AI in games tends to be a lot dumber than the AI that we're trying to create to build self-driving cars and such like that. And this works because in games, AIs can cheat. An AI doesn't have to recognize your player by the pixels on the screen. It can just say, okay, player.transform, where is that player? And it can cheat and figure out a lot of the hard things quite easily. So that's why it's quite a different problem. But that said, I'd be really interested in doing more content on the harder side of things, like the reinforcement learning stuff that Google is doing with games, and particularly kind of trying to beat Atari games and trying to get. Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you recall, the saving system had a way of providing for going across multiple scenes. So the way that worked is that it just saves the IDs. Yeah, exactly, the ID of an object, exactly. And so basically the way this is going to work is that the quest component is going to be a component on the player. So because the player spans scenes and has the same ID across scenes, it's going to load in the same quest data whichever scene you're in. So So it should be able to retain your progress no matter which scene you go into. Yeah, it's very similar to the way that the inventory system is currently working, because the inventory system is, again, a component on the player. The player has an inventory. It's how they have their backpack, and all of the items that you could have in your inventory are in a resource folder in Unity, which is basically a signal to Unity that it needs to load all of those scriptable objects when you load the game. And the reason for that is because you never know which objects a player might have in which particular scene. They could have any object, because they could go to the end of the game, they could pick up the flaming sword of doom, and then they could go back to the first scene. So there's no way of really whittling down which scriptable objects you need to know about. No, not at the moment. The moment the bosses are just bigger, harder versions of the normal enemies. So if you wanted to have the kind of boss fights where the bosses have those sets of defined behaviors, so they'll do so many attacks of one type and then so many attacks of another, that's something to code in specifically, really, because we haven't got that as part of our RPG. Although that would be something very interesting to cover, actually. I'm interested how you'd go about doing that, whether you'd have co-routines to try and go through a set series of actions. It always feels like there's some kind of set series of, I'm going to attack 3 times like this and then 3 times like that. So it'd be interesting, maybe an interesting one to cover, but I've not got that planned at the moment, just to be clear. I think that was it from me. I think my voice is like slowly deteriorating, and you guys don't want to hear me hacking and coughing for the rest of the time. So there was another question here, which someone was asking what microphone I use, which is not RPG related, but this is the Rode Podcaster microphone. Very good mic and very easy to use, very easy to set up because it's a USB microphone. Cool. So yeah, well, thank you everyone who came and asked questions, made this event happen, made this AMA happen. We really hope that you're going to enjoy the course. Really look forward to seeing everyone's feedback. Do go and take the content, leave us lots of feedback. I'm very active in patching and improving the course right now because I'm like right in the midst of things. So any feedback that you provide will very likely end up in the course. So come and help us steer the direction of the course. Yes, thank you, Lucy, and thank you to everyone for coming and asking your questions and making it a lovely afternoon. I'll see you soon.